Meow, meow. Welcome, my dearest humans, to Golden Chonk's Tales of the High Seas. I am your perfectly plump narrator, Golden Chonk, and tonight we embark on an adventure that will send shivers down your spine and have your whiskers twitching with excitement. Did you know that after a massive war, thousands of highly skilled, armed, and dangerous individuals were suddenly jobless and abandoned by their governments, left to starve? What do you think happens when you take a whole lot of trained fighters, strip them of their livelihoods, and then, to add insult to injury, let their former enemies relentlessly attack them without consequence? You get pirates, my friends. Not just any pirates, but the legendary figures of the Golden Age of Piracy, a period so wild and untamed, it makes a catnip party look like a quiet afternoon nap. We're talking about a time from 1715 to around 1726 when the Black Flag reigned supreme, and fortunes were made and lost with the swing of a cutlass. Stick around, because by the end of this tale, you'll understand why these swashbuckling rogues became legends and how their chaotic lives mirrored the very human desire for freedom and a full belly, much like my own. So settle in, grab a bowl of your favorite kibble, and prepare for Golden Chonk's Tales of the High Seas, the post-war pirate boom. Now, let's set the scene, shall we? Imagine, if you will, the summer of 1715. The dust had barely settled from the exhaustive War of the Spanish Succession, a grand power struggle that decided the fate of the Spanish throne, Habsburg or Bourbon, a weighty decision indeed. This monumental conflict, which began way back in 1701, finally concluded, leaving Europe's maritime powers eager to replenish their coffers through bustling overseas trade. But, as often happens with such colossal events, there was an unforeseen consequence, a ripple effect that would change the face of the high seas forever. You see, during the war, a rather ingenious and, dare I say, cat-like tactic was employed: privateering. Think of privateers as government-sanctioned freelancers of the sea. These weren't your regular Navy sailors, they were civilians operating privately owned vessels, given special letters of marque by their governments. Their mission? To harass and capture the merchant shipping of enemy nations, primarily France and Spain, for England, of course. This was a brilliant, cost-effective alternative to maintaining a massive, expensive war fleet. Why build and maintain countless warships when you can simply deputize a bunch of eager seafarers to do your dirty work for a cut of the profits? Theoretically, privateers could assist the regular navy, but their main gig was raiding commerce, and boy, were they good at it. Over the course of the War of the Spanish Succession, British and American privateers were incredibly successful, snatching more than 2,000 ships as prizes. That's a lot of loot, even for a discerning feline like myself. Then came 1713, and England, ever the pragmatist, decided to bow out of the war with the Peace of Utrecht. This treaty wasn't just a piece of paper. It transformed Great Britain into the undisputed maritime superpower of Europe. They were victorious on both land and sea, a truly triumphant moment. But for thousands of sailors who had bravely served as privateers for the British Crown, this victory meant something entirely different: sudden, brutal unemployment. The Royal Navy, utterly bankrupt after a dozen years of relentless warfare, rapidly demobilized its fleet. They mothballed warships and, in a shocking move, dumped nearly 3/4 of their manpower, over 36,000 men, within the first 2 years after the Peace of Utrecht was signed. Imagine that, humans. One day you're a hero, raiding enemy ships, and the next, your contract is worthless. Privateer warships, once symbols of daring and profit, were now tied up at docks, gathering dust. Their crews, these skilled and battle-hardened men, were literally spilled out onto the wharves of England and the Americas, forced to beg for work. And if they were lucky enough to find a spot on a merchant ship, their wages were slashed by over 50%. Barely surviving on a measly 22 to 28 shillings a month, these men, who had just helped their country achieve dominance, were now facing destitution. It's enough to make a cat shed a tear, if I were the sentimental type. But wait, there's more. Peace with Spain did not, by any stretch of the imagination, bring peace to English sailors seeking work in the West Indies. Oh no, it got even worse. Spanish Coast Guard vessels ominously known as the guarda-costas, prowled the turquoise waters of the Caribbean like hungry sharks. They seized English vessels travelling to and from Jamaica, brazenly declaring them to be smugglers if even a single Spanish coin was found on board. And guess what? They always found illicit coins, because the Spanish dollar was the de facto currency throughout all of England's Caribbean colonies. It was a rigged game, a cruel trick of fate. In the first 2 years of this so-called peace, a staggering 38 Jamaican trading vessels were seized, costing their owners nearly £76,000 in losses. When crews dared to resist, the guarda-costas often resorted to violence, killing a few sailors in retribution, while the rest endured months or even years in Cuban prisons. The Caribbean, once a lucrative playground, had become more perilous in peacetime than it ever was during war. Impoverished mariners, their bellies rumbling and their spirits broken, crowded the streets, taverns, and boarding houses of Port Royal, Jamaica. They were seething with anger at the brutal treatment from the Spanish guarda-costas and utterly frustrated by the inaction of their own British government. The losses inflicted by the Spanish meant fewer English merchantmen dared to sail from Port Royal, leading to an acute lack of job opportunities for desperate sailors. English mariners who were captured by the Spanish, some even multiple times, were tortured and abused by their captors. And to top it all off, their employers, trying to offset their shipping losses, simply refused to pay their sailors for the time they spent languishing in Spanish prisons. Can you believe such a raw deal? It's enough to make even a pampered housecat want to join a pirate crew. And that, my dear listeners, is precisely what happened. Fed up with Spanish abuse and British neglect, a large number of these desperate sailors and ex-privateers finally snapped. They turned to piracy. The war, in a cruel twist of irony, had inadvertently trained thousands of new pirate recruits, equipping them with the skills and the hardened hearts necessary for a life under the black flag. One of the very first, a true pioneer of this new era of piracy, was a man named Benjamin Hornigold. And he didn't sail alone. With him was a man who had become truly legendary, known to history as Edward Teach, or Thatch. Both had served side by side on Jamaican privateers during the war, and both found themselves jobless and aimless once peace was declared. By the summer of 1713, they were utterly fed up with the grinding poverty of Port Royal and furious at the relentless harassment by the Spanish guarda-costas. Hornigold, a man of action and keen observation, convinced Teach and a motley crew of former shipmates and drinking buddies to put their privateering skills to good use and solve both their problems simultaneously. Their plan was deliciously simple: go back to attacking the Spanish, but this time, keep all the plunder for themselves. All they needed was a small ship, a few good men, and a secure base from which to operate. And Hornigold, being the astute fellow he was, knew just the spot right there in the Caribbean, the Bahamas. During the recent war, the sparsely inhabited islands of the Bahamas had seen fierce fighting. Most of the action centered around the island with the most commercial importance, New Providence. Back in 1703, a combined Franco-Spanish expedition had virtually annihilated Nassau, the island's only major settlement, chief harbour, and seat of government for the Bahamas. In the year following this devastating sack, the governor of the Bahamas, probably quite distraught, simply abdicated his post. And in the years that followed, many of Nassau's remaining inhabitants gave up hope and fled to the mainland, seeking refuge from the persistent chaos. As the population dwindled, no effort was made to re-establish a colonial government in Nassau. It was an abandoned paradise, ripe for the taking. Then, in 1713, the pirates moved in. When Hornigold and his intrepid party first set foot on the sandy beach at Nassau, they didn't find a bustling town. Instead, they found a collection of partially collapsed buildings, stubbornly overgrown with scrub and tropical vegetation, all clustered around the burned-out shells of a church and a fort. On the entire island, there were probably fewer than 30 families, eking out a meagre existence in hovels and rudimentary houses, surviving on fishing, tree cutting, or salvaging the remains of ships wrecked on the island's treacherous shores. Hornigold, with a glint in his eye, knew he'd made the right choice. This was their sanctuary, their lawless haven. The men, energized by their newfound purpose, organized themselves into 3 formidable bands, each building large wooden boats capable of carrying 30 men. For the next 6 months, Hornigold and his burgeoning band of pirates launched relentless attacks on small Spanish trading vessels and isolated sugar plantations, ranging from the Straits of Florida all the way to the shores of Cuba. And when Hornigold's crew returned to Nassau, their boats were laden with spoils: expensive Silesian linens, exotic Asian silks, glistening silver coins plundered from Spanish vessels, and of course, plenty of rum. In total, Hornigold's crew brought cargoes worth a staggering 13,175 balans into the ruins of Nassau. Not bad for a bunch of unemployed sailors, eh? Other former privateers, hearing whispers of Hornigold's success, soon followed in his wake, drawn to the promise of freedom and fortune. The island of New Providence, once a forgotten outpost, suddenly found itself at the heart of heavily traded sea lanes. To the west lay the Spanish possessions, a tempting target. To the north, a short sailing trip away, was the North American coast. And connecting France and England to their rich sugar colonies in the West Indies were the European trade routes, a constant stream of potential prizes. By 1715, spurred on by the success of Captain Hornigold, more than 2,000 ex-privateers had descended upon New Providence, transforming it into a chaotic but thriving pirate haven. They proudly referred to their anarchic state as the Republic of Pirates. And by the following year, 1716, the pirates based in Nassau and New Providence Island had become a formidable menace to mercantile shipping, striking fear into the hearts of merchants from the coast of Maine all the way to the Spanish mainland. But my dear humans, this was just the beginning of a truly revived pirate war on the civilized world. Now for a tale of audacious plunder that solidified Nassau's reputation as a pirate stronghold. On July 24, 1715, the annual Spanish treasure fleet, a sight to behold, departed Havana, its holds groaning under the weight of a vast cargo of jewels, gold and silver, valued at an astonishing 14 million pesos. Their destination? Cadiz, Spain. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. A mere week later, the fleet was caught in the merciless embrace of a vicious hurricane. All 11 treasure galleons were brutally wrecked on the eastern shore of Florida. Spanish vessels from Havana were immediately dispatched to salvage the wrecks, equipped with diving gear to recover the sunken treasure. They managed to recover several million pieces of eight, most of which they prudently transported to the fortress in Havana. However, approximately 350,000 pieces of eight still awaited transport, sitting tantalizingly in a guardhouse on shore, under the watchful eyes of 60 armed men. Unbeknownst to the Spanish, a band of ex-privateers in Jamaica, including the likes of Henry Jennings, Benjamin Hornigold, our fearless pioneer, Edward Teach, soon to be known as Blackbeard, Charles Vane and Samuel Bellamy, had caught wind of the salvaging operation. Like a pack of hungry wolves scenting prey, they set sail in 5 ships for the coast of Florida, a small flotilla of around 300 men. With a swift and daring strike, they attacked the Spanish guards and seized the waiting treasure, making off with it towards Jamaica. But here's where the plot thickens. Upon reaching Jamaica, the pirates were met not with cheers, but with a cold reception. The Spanish had, quite reasonably, complained to the governor of Jamaica, Lord Archibald Hamilton. They pointed out that there was a peace treaty in force, and they demanded the return of their silver. Since the war was indeed long over, Lord Hamilton, with a stern face, informed the ex-privateers that they would not go unpunished. And so, with their Jamaican welcome revoked, the pirates, with their ill-gotten gains, set sail for Nassau, establishing it as their main base of operations. From that point on, most Nassau pirates focused their raiding efforts on the lucrative trade routes between Britain and her American colonies. The pirate presence in the Caribbean had another significant and often complained about effect. It stirred unrest among the African slaves toiling in the cane fields of the Sugar Islands. Whispers of the Pirate Republic, a place where they would be welcomed, spread like wildfire among these enslaved peoples. And so, in ever-increasing numbers, they ran away from their oppressive plantations, determined to become pirates themselves. Inevitably, as the Pirate Republic on Nassau flourished, Powerful personalities and dominant figures emerged from the ranks of the brigands who flocked to the free life on the island. Among the most notorious of Nassau was, of course, Edward Teach, soon to be immortalized by his terrifying nickname, Blackbeard. This fearsome figure would be wanted by authorities from Honduras all the way to Nova Scotia. Bloody and cruel, Blackbeard was a terror not only to his victims, but even to fellow pirates who dared to consort with him in taverns and brothels. On November 28, 1717, Blackbeard and his crew captured a 200-ton French slave ship off the island of Martinique, which he chillingly renamed the Queen Anne's Revenge. Aboard this formidable vessel, Blackbeard terrorized the West Indies during his infamous raiding spree. Other pirate captains were equally fearsome in their own right. Charles Vane, for example, specialized in preying on shipping bound for North American ports. Vane was a strategic thinker, often sailing with other pirate captains in a flotilla, recognizing this as the most effective way to ensure numerical superiority when attacking their prey. Vane was also a calculating rogue. He never allowed his lust for women, his rage, or his drink to cloud his judgment. He enjoyed years of success as a Nassau captain precisely because he knew when to fight and, crucially, when to run. A smart cat, that Vane. Perhaps one of the most successful pirates of the post-Spanish succession period was Samuel Black Sam Bellamy, who is believed to have plundered over $130 million in loot. Despite his fearsome reputation, Bellamy was reportedly well-mannered and, like many pirates of the era, dressed flashily. He was known for carrying 4 dueling pistols in his sash, a truly intimidating sight. Like many other pirate ships of the day, Black Sam's crew was remarkably democratic, holding votes to elect men into vital crew roles. Bellamy typically pirated with 2 ships, one heavily armed for brute force and the other smaller and more maneuverable, perfect for blocking ships and easily capturing them. His balanced and coordinated attacks meant he often took many ships with their valuable cargoes fully intact. After participating in that thrilling pirate raid on the 1715 Treasure Fleet salvage operation, Sam Bellamy partnered with Ben Hornigold and Edward Teach aboard a ship called the Marianne. However, by the summer of 1716, Hornigold's crew grew increasingly annoyed by their captain's steadfast refusal to attack ships flying English colours. They believed in equal opportunity plundering, it seems. So, in a democratic display of discontent, they voted to depose both him and Teach from command. Sam Bellamy was then elected captain of the remaining 90 crewmen. After captaining the Marianne for a while, Bellamy came upon the ship Sultana, capturing her and converting her into a powerful 26-gun galley, which he then took command of as his flagship. In late February 1717, Bellamy set his sights on the wider galley, a 300-ton, 18-gun slave ship, as she passed through the treacherous windward passage between Cuba and Hispaniola. She had just completed the second leg of the notorious Middle Passage in the Columbian Exchange, having dropped off 500 slaves in the Caribbean and loaded up with boatloads of gleaming gold, precious treasure, and fine goods to return to England. After a fierce 3-day chase, the Wider's captain, Lawrence Prince, finally surrendered the ship without a struggle. And here's where Bellamy lived up to his reputation as the Robin Hood of the seas. After capturing the ship, he traded the Sultana to Captain Prince for the wider galley, making the captured vessel his new flagship. Captain Bellamy and his crew then spent the next several months pirating off the coast of the British North American colonies, leaving a trail of plundered riches in their wake. Another ex-privateer who made his way to Nassau and later became a notorious pirate captain was Calico Jack Rackham. A flamboyant figure, he was fond of splashy waistcoats, bright ribbons, and colourful breeches. Truly a pirate with a sense of style. Jack Rackham was initially elected quartermaster of Vane's ship, the Ranger, but his true fame and enduring reputation came later, when he met and wooed a flamboyantly beautiful Irish woman named Bonny, whom he took pirating with him. Bonny arrived in Nassau around 1715 or 1716 as the wife of a poor young sailor. Though only 16 at the time, she yearned for the adventure of life at sea. Despite her married status, she often sought out the company of pirates like Vane, Blackbeard, or Hornigold drinking with them and soaking up their wild way of life. When she met and eventually fell in love with the swaggering Jack Rackham, she proved to be every bit as fierce a fighter as any male pirate, fighting bravely by his side. A true queen of the seas, in my humble feline opinion. Now, not all pirates were born for the life of plunder. There was, for example, the rather curious case of the gentleman pirate, Steedy Bonnet. This fellow reportedly turned to piracy to escape a particularly unhappy marriage. Imagine that, preferring the dangers of the high seas to a nagging spouse. Bonnet, a member of a good English family and the owner of a successful sugar plantation in Barbados, was regarded as a gentleman by his peers on the island until he suddenly announced his astonishing intention to become a pirate. Bonnet soon christened his sugar trading ship the Revenge and set sail to join the raucous pirates of Nassau. He would eventually fall in with the crew of none other than Blackbeard himself. Perhaps Blackbeard's fearsome reputation was a welcome change from domestic disputes. While popular culture, for the past 3 centuries, has painted a romanticized picture of the pirate's life as a swashbuckling adventure, the reality, my dear humans, was far from the truth. Life aboard pirate ships during the Golden Age was incredibly crowded and, frankly, quite dirty. Pirate crews were significantly larger than those of merchant ships, meaning men were packed in closely together aboard their vessel. Add to this the intense, oppressive heat of the tropical West Indies, the liberal consumption of alcohol, and the touchy pride of men who fiercely defended the equality they gained by joining the democracy of pirates. And it becomes crystal clear that maintaining discipline aboard these rowdy ships was no easy task. However, pirate society was governed by a set of articles that the crewmen and officers signed upon joining. These articles were a remarkable attempt to impose a legal system that everyone could agree upon, a sort of pirate constitution. One common pirate article, for instance, required every man to keep his weapons clean and ready for use at any given moment. A practical rule, wouldn't you agree? Gambling was usually strictly banned on board the ships, and drinking was typically restricted to the top deck to prevent accidental fires breaking out in the holds. Imagine the chaos if a rum-fueled brawl sparked a fire below deck. Contrary to the popular culture's depiction of ruthless, tyrannical pirate captains lording over their crews with an iron fist, the vast majority of pirate crews were remarkably democratic. They organised shipboard elections to choose the most able or simply the most popular sailors for important leadership and officer roles, such as captain and quartermaster. And here's the truly fascinating part. These elected officers could just as easily be deposed by the very crew they commanded. Imagine voting your boss out of office because you didn't like his decisions, a truly revolutionary concept for the time. The makeup of pirate crews was incredibly diverse, a vibrant tapestry of men hailing from all backgrounds and races. Among their ranks were escaped slaves, men disgraced or scorned by civilized society, penniless ex-privateers, and impoverished sailors. Some even possessed former military exploits, bringing a wealth of combat experience to the pirate fold. Pirate crews needed frequent replenishing as the life was undeniably hard. Most men sailing under the black flag were volunteers, drawn to the promise of freedom and fortune, but casualties from disease, brutal combat, unfortunate accidents, and occasional desertions took their inevitable toll. Since able seamen, skilled maritime carpenters, coopers, barrel makers, and navigators were highly prized, pirates actively sought recruits from among the crews of the ships they captured. Pirates, surprisingly, did not like risking injuries to themselves or, more importantly, damage to their valuable prizes. So, when ships tried to run or put up a fight, their captains were usually punished severely, a warning to others. The pirates would then, with surprising civility, try to persuade the rest of the captured men to enlist in their crews. The pirate captain or quartermaster would often make compelling arguments to the captured merchantmen, highlighting the poor treatment and underfunding they received from their own captains. And more often than not, these persuasive speeches convinced many to join the pirate ranks. After all, who wouldn't want a better deal? The actual capturing of prizes by pirate ships, much like their lives, has been embellished by popular culture. Pirates seldom surprised their prey, sneaking up on them in the dead of night. Rather, they boldly announced their arrival with a dramatic shot across the enemy ship's bow, immediately unfurling and displaying the ominous black flag. As they closed with their terrified victims, pirates usually appeared on deck in a state of wild abandon, often drunk and heavily armed. The alcohol, while certainly contributing to their boisterous demeanour, also temporarily boosted their courage and dulled the pain of any potential wounds. Frequently, they would dance about the deck to the lively music provided by the ship's musicians, waving their weapons, shouting terrifying war cries, growling like wild beasts, and often hurling colourful insults at their prey. Though most pirates had fearsome reputations as eager fighters, they truly had little to gain and much to lose from prolonged combat. A damaged ship meant less plunder, and injured crew members were a liability. Therefore, the pirates' intimidating appearance, their wild shouts, and the sheer terror they inspired were usually enough to frighten their prey into surrendering before a single shot had to be fired in earnest. However, if the target dared to run, the pirates would give chase, relentlessly pursuing their prey, attempting to disable her before closing in for the kill. And if the enemy crew resisted further, the pirates would then, with a blood-curdling roar, jump onto their enemies' decks, engaging in bloody, close-quarters boarding action, a chaotic dance of cutlasses and pistols. By the end of 1717, the Nassau pirates had so savaged Caribbean shipping that the British government, bless their slow but steady hearts, finally began to take serious notice of the sharp drop in their commerce. It was one thing, you see, for these scoundrels to be raiding the commercial shipping of the Spanish or the French. That was almost understandable, a sort of unofficial continuation of hostilities. But when these rascalous pirates of Nassau began severely hurting British trade, the government of King George III finally sat up and paid attention. As the situation in the Caribbean worsened, and it became painfully apparent that the Royal Navy would not, or perhaps could not, suppress the Nassau pirates, a syndicate of powerful British merchants, fed up with their losses, joined forces to deal with the problem themselves. Soon enough, this determined consortium had formulated a bold and audacious plan to restore order to Nassau and, once and for all, defeat the formidable pirates of the Caribbean. And that, my dear humans, is where we must pause our tale for tonight. What became of the Republic of Pirates? Did the British merchants succeed in their bold plan? And what fates awaited the infamous Blackbeard, the cunning Charles Vane, and the democratic Black Sam Bellamy? You'll have to tune in next time for the thrilling conclusion of Golden Chonk's Tales of the High Seas. Until then, keep your wits sharp, your whiskers twitching, and your spirit of adventure alive. This is Golden Chonk, signing off for now. Meow, meow.